Let us pray. May only truth be spoken, may only truth be heard, we ask in your name, Holy One. Amen. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus saw the crowds, he climbed a hillside. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down and taught them. This is the Sea of Galilee in the picture. Have you been to a quiet place lately? I think we can find these quiet places away from the crowds and life's busyness, because our lives are so busy. But maybe not just in nature a quiet place, or when we are alone. It can also be at a bedside vigil, where our heart stills and we feel the presence of love with us. We might be stuck in traffic and waiting again to turn left as the guy ahead didn't. And we can look up at the clouds and we can watch creation go by in its own timetable. And we can know that God is with us. That is a quiet place too. Or it can just simply be feeling your cat brush his fur along your leg when you're weary and tired. God's voice can resonate in our souls when we take a moment to breathe and rest. This brings peace and calm even in the midst of our pandemics and our other storms of life. In Matthew's gospel, we find Jesus going away from the busy life he had, from the busy Judean marketplaces, and out onto the gently rolling plains by the Sea of Galilee, just as his ministry was taking off and peaking. Why would he leave town when he was doing such great work among the people? After all, the crowds and the dinner invites and those times when he went towards folk and sat with them and those healing moments that he brought into their lives, this drew such attention that Jesus sensed that following the promptings of God's light was perhaps a different path. He realized that God's light within us in this new kingdom life was never meant to be center stage, but centering. And maybe our own centering work is done in our hearts when we get quiet and look at what's really going on inside. That's when the Spirit helps us move through life in a new way. For center stage is not where the poor in spirit hang out. No. Or those who mourn or feel lost and alone. You won't find them there. You won't find us there. When life humbles us, we see it from different eyes. And this can transform us from the inside out if we are willing to be open to change and growth. When I was asked to rewrite this sermon, I said that. When I was asked to rewrite this sermon, I have to confess I didn't want to. For I had written this sermon before on the same passage a while ago, and I even preached it in another place of worship. But the feedback was troubling. And my mentor wisely pointed out that my words showed not very much vulnerability or depth, even though I thought it seemed pretty well written. Have you ever been there? Oh dear. I really thought that I'd grasped the essence of what Jesus was trying to teach us on that day. For though my poetic license had Jesus moving away from his busy ministry and up that little hillside to sit quietly, I suddenly realized that I had been expounding about virtues that I wasn't sure I understood now. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. Oh dear, you can't slip in the back door with Jesus' words. They hit you right in the heart because his wisdom shows a deeper truth about God's heart of love and the human connection, which, as far as spirit goes, is always the heart of the matter. In my earlier sermon, I had the blessed poor and the humble valiantly racing up the hillside, albeit with others hauling them up to sit with Jesus. And the picture just doesn't fit, does it? Not at all. Because Jesus always moved towards the poor. And most of us learn that it's the struggles in our valley, in those valleys we walk through, that shape us the most. Jesus always moved towards the humble and the sick, seeking those he called the lost sheep. And haven't we all needed rescuing a time or two? When we're down and weary, we need the unconditional love of a good shepherd. Do you know what happens when you fall from a mountain? Nothing good. And that's what happened to me. Perhaps that's why we hide our struggles and so often pretend that everything's fine, when deep down, we're in pain. Sometimes we even distract ourselves from reality with a false bravado. How does that old song by Mac Davis go? You could help me, Kathy. Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in a mirror. I get better looking every day. Oh dear, that's... I was going to sing it, but I was scared. Well, that's not true, is it? But Mac does end with words that do have a ring of truth. At least they appear to. I'm just doing the best that I can. Am I the only one that struggles with this? Truth is a two-edged sword, and it slices through the rhetoric and those thick veil of robes that we hold too long in place by stories that we tell ourselves. Sometimes it takes a fall from a mountain to realize how far we are from the real truth. Jesus was giving us a blueprint for living kingdom life more abundantly. We may be doing the best that I can, or best that we can. There you go. There's ego speaking. Oh, the best that I can. At least I caught it this time. That's good. Baby steps. And it works for a while. And yet the Apostle Paul reminds us, I can show you a more excellent way, and it is love. According to the Berkeley Educational Journal from one of our universities, living with humility, or another word for poor in spirit, that's what humility is, can actually help us handle stress more effectively and give us higher levels of physical and mental well-being. Humble persons show greater generosity, helpfulness, and gratitude. I love that. All things that can only serve to draw us closer to who? To others. To others. Wow. This sounds like Jesus' words, lived out in kindness, respect, and fairness. And where have we heard those before? We've all come to the end of ourselves, though. fallen flat and just wanted to lay there, poor and exhausted, that's when the grace and guidance of God that Jesus spoke of gently brings someone or something into your life to do a new and beautiful work. Who hasn't felt the warmth of a kind word from someone? And you spoke of that in your prayer this morning, Kathy. Let the kind words become who we are. I loved those words. Or we had a neighbor show up just when the wind blew off the shingles on your roof, and it had already started raining. Our roof leaked in our little house when we first got married, 43 years ago next week. And we had no money. We couldn't afford to fix it, and I would get very dejected. Put out the pails, to collect it. Had a new little baby, and of course leaked in his room. But we had a neighbor who lived down the street, and our neighbor's name was Mr. Kesey. Mr. Kesey was came to Mount Zion, and those Mount Zion folk would know of him. He was a pastor, a United Church pastor in his later years, and he was always helping out the neighborhood back when I knew him back then and I was a neighbor. Mr. Kesey would trundle over with his ladder in hand and climb up on that roof and patch it with tar. And I would hear him hammering love on the roof every time it rained. I felt so cared for. Wow. The Beatitudes speak of that inner life that manifests in outward actions of love and paying it forward. And when a friend gifted me with something the other day, I asked him, "How can I ever pay you back?" And he said to me, "Just pay it forward. That's thanks enough." Jesus was all about living our lives, caring and lifting up those around us. Look how he stopped for a blind man, how he sat on the shore with fishermen, as we have our beach scene here. He sat and he listened to them and he worked alongside them. And he came alongside that little girl dying, visited with her and her family, teaching us that God's light within us can become love in action as we share and care in acts of kindness. Recently, I learned a bit more about this inner life. I learned it in a Tai Chi class. You may have noticed that I walk with a cane and I use a walker. And that's because I'm in chronic pain. And so when I stand for a long time, I begin to wobble, which is why my husband got me a nice seat to sit on. It's the helpers in our lives, isn't it? Who help us along our way. I have arthritis and I have inoperable cysts on my spine, and it's uncomfortable and debilitating. I get embarrassed because I'm on turtle speed now sometimes. And even with the smile on my face, sometimes I'm not as real as I should be when I'm feeling struggling. I don't know if any of you have these kind of issues, but we've all felt pain, and we all need to learn to dance with it and live with it because it becomes a part of our life sometimes. All different kinds, emotional and physical. I was speaking this week with a wonderful gentleman, Jim, from Trinity, and he was messaging. We often chat back and forth. And we were talking about pain, and he wrote this to me, and I asked if I could read it, and he was speaking of his pain. He deals with cervical stenosis. He said, "Pain helps us to have greater understanding of others and more compassion. I would rather have my pain than give it up for any other item that can be offered me, because it's allowed me to look at how hard it must be for God to see all of the suffering we go through and yet love, and we love. And I just love those words, and they spoke to me. So as I took up this Tai Chi class, I want to tell you a little bit about it. Tai Chi is an ancient art of self-defense, and it's often described as meditation in motion. In other words, the Tai Chi Grand Master faces an opponent with complete and controlled movements while remaining utterly still in the inner soul or inner body. And all of the moves can be made within the shadow of an ox. That's a very small space indeed. I'm showing you some of these moves. They are calming me because that is what it does when we move our body. The moves should be smooth and continuous, and they actually are patterned after the way a silkworm's cocoon is unraveled, harvested onto a spool for sewing into silk cloth. Isn't that amazing? It reminds me of how the gospel of kindness and respect and fairness is shared with each other, smoothly and unraveling throughout our days as we tap into the continuous flow of love from the very breath we breathe. This is one of the moves, one of my favorites. Well, I don't move with flowing grace, and I've worked hard, but smooth moves don't really come easy to me. But my stubborn self keeps trying, and it was in a moment of weary defeat that I discovered what it is Tai Chi could do for me and has done for many others. During this particular class, I really pushed myself really hard, trying to keep up, but instead I started sinking into the pain and the weakness really fast. My first defense was to tell myself to keep moving. Isn't that what we do? And ignore the pain. It was the wrong decision, and I began to weep. We were on a Zoom meeting, and I knew everyone could see me, and I became very embarrassed and defeated. This was a class for all kinds of people with disabilities, and I couldn't keep up. I was crushed. I bet you've been here before. Worked hard for that promotion only to be passed over. Or paid for that credit card off and then the car breaks down the next day. Or you forget your mask and you don't realize till you've got your hand on the door at the grocery. We all fail. We try too hard, we weary, and we stumble a lot. Well, before I could get the button shut off, I'm not good with buttons on the computer, and hide and sulk alone, my teacher noticed me. And she stopped the class, and she took us to the hillside, so to speak. She sat us down, and she gently began to teach us. What she said changed my life. Tai Chi is not outer work, she said. It's centering inner work. We work on the moves within before we can ever move our bodies to match and have them flow. With that, we did the rest of the class without moving. We centered and we became still. Does that remind you of anything? prayer. We visualized the position of our bodies. We felt the energy flowing into each hand and foot. And the pain that I was in just became a grumpy companion again, and not my master. God is so good to bring people into my lives when I so need words of encouragement and hope. And God does that for us all. Blessed are you when you've had enough, when you just can't go on, and the Spirit whispers, just be still. You're not alone, for my mercy is new every morning. For the first time, my poor spirit got it. The inner life resets and renews us over and over. It's a deep well of grace from the giver of life, filling and refilling us when we become poor. And it's the inner life that Christians call the Christ light within us, that manifests in outer acts of love and mercy when we reach out to one another. So Jesus' words are full of hope, and they're a quiet place to begin again and again and again. On every hillside we climb, on every path we will ever walk, and our stories become our sermons that sometimes we must rewrite. So let's go often and sit on that hill and get still. And let's let these amazing words fall gently into our hearts once again. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for yours is the kingdom of heaven.